in the Constitution, it says that the co-optees will not attend meetings which are considering the Council's constitution. Is that in line with what your introduction covered, John?
My instruction is they can take part in the item 1, but they cannot join any other part of the meeting.
All right.
Public
Okay,
meeting.
they have to leave the meeting at that point.
Our precedent is that beyond the items where they are able to debate and vote, we, as a matter of courtesy, we extend the invitation for them to sit in on the meeting, to observe, but not to take part and not to vote.
Okay, thank you.
Yeah, they have no voting rights whatsoever. Could I ask the two councillors, are you happy with that? Are you aware of that?
Yes, I'm aware of it, and I'm happy to leave when we've finished with the appropriate items.
Thank you very much.
I'm aware of it as well. That's fine. Thank you.
I see Councillor Hyman's got his hand up.
Thank you, Chairman. I'm slightly concerned of people's voices breaking up and the reception. I don't think it's a problem at my end, and we do have to be able to hear what people are saying. Peter's was certainly breaking up a lot. I think I got the gist of it, so we can move on from that. But could you please make sure that that we're not being expected to conduct this when some of the people's speech is garbled? My problem, first of all, is I had my hand up because for some reason I can't find the hands up thing on my iPad, and I press the more and it doesn't give me what I thought it said last time, which was a hands up.
Jerry, it's under participants at the bottom of that.
Thank you so much. Okay, I'll let. I'd like to speak on this item, but I'll let you introduce it. Thanks.
So have you now found your raised hand? Councillor Hyman, have you now found it? Okay, well, I'll carry on then. Robin Taylor, you were going to introduce this.
Yes, thank you, Chair. So item 6 is proposed revisions to the Code of Conduct. The report sets out minor revisions to align the wording of the Nolan principles used within the code to the same wording now being used by the Committee on Standards in Public Life. The publication of the LGA model code on the back of this change has been delayed. Once that has been published, we will bring that LGA model code back into the Standards Committee for you to review. So for the time being, this is a basic realignment of the wording to make sure that we are in line with the committee itself, which is obviously the lead body on standards. Thank you, Chair.
Thank you. Now, I'm assuming that everybody's read this report. There are some typos, but I would require not to go through those if we can avoid it, because there's no point. We have actually pointed out at the beginning of the briefing the other night. So have I got any councillors who wish to raise a question? Or hang on, no, sorry, I think Councillor Ward. Yes, Councillor Ward, did you want to speak for your 4 minutes?
Thank you, Chairman. On this particular item, having reviewed it, I do not wish to trouble you any longer.
Okay, thank you, Councillor. In that case, I'm after questions from any of the councillors. I see 2 hands raised. Councillor Hyman.
Thank you, Chairman. Yes, the CSPL report came to went to the Standards Committee before us, before the election last year. So it was the 12th of March, I think, 2019, and included a range of considerations which were being recommended by the CSPL, the Committee for Standards in Public Life. It was there was a report within the officer report, which was what would you call extracts from the full CSPL report, but that did make it clear that what it was about was effectiveness. It wasn't just a matter of improving the wording and understanding of the Nolan principles, and also obviously the LGA model code, which is something which would affect the towns and parishes as well. That understandably is on hold, but it was very much about the practical implementation and effectiveness of the of codes of conduct that we have and the Nolan principles. So my concern here is to make sure that not only are we making the changes to the wording, which I don't think are of no impact, as the officer report seems to imply. I think it's very important. What we need to do is to ensure that we've got a system which makes sure that that is applied and that is how we act and behave and throughout our decision making and as councillors. In fact, in all ways as councillors, where if you look at the changes being made on page 11 and page 12, they are fairly. Can we assume? Can everybody confirm they have read and fully understood this, or are people trying to keep up with this? Can we have a thumbs up from everybody who's read and fully understood this and picked up the typos and whatever? Because I think you ought to tell us what the typos are so that we don't incorporate any that people have missed. But I would certainly suggest, we as a council, we need to be very wary. Members of the public, certainly some of them see changes in decision-making processes as being negative. These are obviously easier in some ways, but they can make for problems with decision-making. And they certainly wouldn't want COVID-19 to be used as an excuse for reducing standards. If we are going to introduce this, as we are, we should also, alongside it, have quite clearly should have some method of ensuring that we apply it in practice and that it works. Now, I'd like our officers, please, to please explain perhaps what they are suggesting in respect of particularly in honesty, where it now just simply says holders of public office, it should say in there, of course, but doesn't. Holders of public office should be truthful. What systems have you looked at alongside this such that we can ensure that there's a way for the public that we represent to make sure that we abide by that people aren't. I mean, I think accuracy would be a word that.
Okay, Councillor Hyman, I think we're getting somewhere. You've been talking and we're losing the point of the question. I've got the end part of it.
I'm asking the question. Thank you, Chairman. I'm asking the question. What is the what alternatives, what methods have the officers looked at in order to ensure that we as councillors or members of the public have some sort of recourse if we believe, a power of questioning, I suppose at the time, if we believe that members, officers, anybody in public life is not being truthful. We know what it's like watching the 5 o'clock updates from the government, don't we? So what have we looked at in there? Because certainly I think we should be looking as a committee now today at ensuring that we've got some sort of system in place to ensure that these are implementable and implemented properly. Thank you.
Robin Taylor, can you answer that, or Fiona?
Yeah, I'm happy to pick that up, Chairman. I mean, the first thing to say is that we, as I said, when the LGA model code is available, I think that will be the best opportunity to have a fuller discussion about this, and we'll make sure that we bring it into the committee. The statements of the Nolan principles don't exist on their own, so they're not meant to provide all the details around which they're delivered. So, for example, in terms of honesty, the fact that the wording is taken out in that section around declaration of interests, for example, and it's picked up elsewhere, it doesn't change the fact that we will still have our processes in place, making sure that officers and members are required to declare any interest they have and act accordingly. So I suppose it's just providing some reassurance to the community that all those processes that we have in place, the standards regime that we have locally for elected members, and all of the codes of conduct that officers and also contractors and others are required to abide by remain in place. This is about making sure that we harmonise the way that we express those Nolan principles of public life, making sure that we harmonise those with the way that the Committee for Standards in Public Life also describes them. I think that the descriptions as they've been refined by that committee are better, actually. And I think it's actually really important that they are expressed in the most concise and easy to understand way, because this sits at the core of the standards regime. And all people working in public life, whether they're in paid or elected or contracted positions, need to look at these statements and ask themselves whether or not they are abiding by them. So it's a prompt always to the consciences of those working in public life, engaging in public life, and that's where we start. And then around that, we build the detail. A lot of that detail is already there. I'm happy to hear any suggestions from the committee members as to how the detail of our other arrangements might change in light of this. But in terms of where the debate should happen and when, Officer's suggestion is that we pick that up when we look at the LGA model code and make sure that we take the model code, if not in its entirety, then we adapt it for Waverley in the best way possible. Thank you, Chair.
The question came up about people understanding the changes. I read through every one, obviously, and I found them quite brief. I enjoyed that because in my other life, of course, I found the more words you put in things, the more risk there is of actually people changing them. So I found that by being brief and concise, I would suggest that you've got it right. Now, other questions? Anybody else asking a question? Councillor Reynolds.
Thank you, Chairman. It's just once this has been adopted by your full council, which I think maybe next week, I assume the revised code will be sent out to all the parish clerks with a request that I suppose that they are ideally adopted by the parishes as well. Is that correct?
So through you, Chairman, that is correct. That's what we always do. When Waverley updates its own code, we send that to all of the town and parish councils. Under the legislation as it currently is, it's the responsibility of individual town and parish councils to adopt their own code, but largely all of the towns and parishes will keep in line with the Waverley code. It helps to have that harmonisation between the borough and the towns and parishes, but ultimately it is for the towns and parishes to determine any changes to their own code locally.
Is there any other councillor wishes to ask a question? I can't see any hands raised. Councillor Follows.
Councillor Follows.
Sorry, not so much a question, just to quickly say to discuss some of Councillor Hyman's points. Obviously, I think we will have this debate more fully when we get round to the full code being released. But I have quite a lot of confidence that the structures that we have, assuming that we start from the foundation of trust that we really should start from when dealing with each other and even officers, the scrutiny, monitoring, standards processes that we have support this code in the way it works. So with the exception of having a shot of sodium pentothal at the door for when councillors and officers come in, I think realistically, from a basis of trust, these are reasonable practices. And I know we'll have that debate more fully, but as a consequence, I fully support the changes in this code. And just to also say, understand the changes and where the typos are. And I know they'll be dealt with by officers before full council. Thank you.
Any other questions?
Chairman, Councillor Goodridge and Councillor Adams both have their hands raised.
Councillor Goodridge first, please.
Thank you, Chairman. I mean, I think we're making heavy weather. This changes to the code of conduct for the Nolan principles. There's nothing to do with COVID, as it might be implied. It would be coming up in the agenda anyway. And the idea was to simplify the Nolan principles so that our wording tallied with the national wording, so that we didn't have confusion. And I know that Councillor Hyman in the past has been unhappy because the wording wasn't the same, and all we're doing is making it the same. And the code of conduct is here. The council has all its procedures for dealing with alleged breaches of the code. That doesn't change, and it will be coming back anyway when the government wish to look at codes of conduct again, and then we can look at it then. But it seems to me this is a very sensible way of ensuring that all the wording for the Nolan principles for the borough and nationally are the same, and it's simplified and it removes potential ambiguity. So I'm very much in favour of the changes subject to the typos being adopted. Thank you.
Thank you, Councillor Goodridge. Councillor Adams, I think you were next.
Yes, thank you, Chairman. I was surprised to see that this statement in the honesty about having a duty to declare any private interest relating to public duties was actually removed in these this case. That's in section 3. But I understand this is actually agreed by MPs, so now I know exactly
I'm
why
sorry,
that
but
was
Fiona, we can't hear Councillor Adams properly. I can't hear his question.
No, he is breaking up very badly. Councillor Adams, perhaps you could restate your question?
Can you
yeah.
just face that one direction? It's when you turned your head, it seemed to break
Oh,
up.
okay, right.
better.
I was right. This is again about honesty, which is section 3, item F. I was surprised to see that the duty to really to not to bother with personal interest was removed, and you know, but I understand that this has had to be agreed by MPs, so now I understand.
I'm sorry, Councillor Adams, we can't make you out. Fiona, what?
Yeah, Chair, if it helps, I think I can answer the first part of Councillor Adams' question, although I didn't hear the second part. So the references to interests and the need to declare interests haven't been removed from the Nolan principles. They have, to a certain degree, been moved around. So if you look at small point B, integrity, there are still references to interests. And again, I would say that within our own code, we're not proposing that we remove the requirement for members to disclose pecuniary interests and non-pecuniary interests. That remains the same. So don't necessarily disagree with Councillor Adams' point, but I hope that provides some reassurance that we're not, you know, editing out the point about interests altogether.
Councillor Adams, does that answer that point?
Yes, that's fine. Thank you.
Your second part, have you a second part?
Well, the second part was that I understand these had to be agreed by MPs, so I wasn't surprised that that has been removed from that section.
Okay, thank you. Now, is there any other question from anybody?
We have Councillors Goodridge and Adams. If you could put your hands down, please. Councillor Hyman has his hand up again. Councillor
Hyman.
So yes, thank you. I did want to come back on the response that I had, and I had put my hand up, but it had disappeared. So I think we have a difficulty there with. Do you have an automatic button that puts all hands down or something? Because if you do that, can you tell us if you've done it so that we know that we're no longer indicating? That would be handy. I don't think I've got an indicator on the screen. Yes, I was going to answer Councillor Adams's point, but I agree with the monitoring officer that it's that they've been moved around, and you have to read all of them and read it as one in order to be able to see what they've done. I entirely disagree with the idea that we just kick things into the future. This isn't all about the local government code of conduct. That is something which certainly is of interest, or should be of interest to parish councils, because I think the CSPL, if I recall correctly, is recommending that all parish councils adopt the code of conduct of the district council that applies. So you know, this is something whereby it was all brought forward to the 12th of March. I'd like to know really how many people here have read the 12th of March 2019, so a year and a bit ago, papers, because if you've read those, you'll realise that this is only bringing forward a very small fraction of what was actually on the agenda for that meeting. And so my question is why, I mean, and we've kicked this into the long grass now for 15 months, and I've you know, brought it forward, tried to get it brought forward repeatedly. We were promised in March 2019 that it would turn up at the June 2019 meeting because it was deferred. Why have the rest not been brought forward to us? Because we weren't awaiting this model code of conduct. That's a red herring. It's nothing to do with that at the moment. The fact that half of what was on the agenda isn't here, and I'm just wondering, why has the rest of it not been brought forward to us? Because I think it's very important. It's what they were trying to do to make sure that this is implemented and actionable and is actually covered, rather than just words in a code of conduct that people tend to ignore.
Okay, thank you, Councillor Hyman. You've made your question and point. Robin, have you got any sort of answers to when it will all be brought forward?
Well, I mean, I think I've already suggested that I think the best time to have the broader discussion around our code of conduct is when we can do it in light of the Local Government Association model code of conduct. Councillor Hyman's correct that that's okay, Councillor Hyman. You can hold your view on that. I'm just giving you my own advice. Councillor Hyman's correct that one of the things that's under discussion is whether or not there would be an automatic harmonisation between a principal council's code of conduct and the towns and parish councils in that area. We need to look at that and see what comes from that. From my own perspective, that would be a sensible thing to do, not least of all because we already have, a large degree, 99% of duplication between all of those codes of conduct. To me, it makes sense. We've taken the opportunity of this standards meeting being called. The reason that we're having this standards meeting this evening rather than later down the line is in order to give the committee principally the opportunity to look at some of the other changes on the back of the coronavirus regulations. So the following two items, we have taken the opportunity whilst doing that to bring forward this change in wording around the Nolan principle. So, the reality of the situation is that we've brought forward what can be done with the information we've got at the time and trying to prioritise what goes onto the agenda. So I'm perfectly satisfied that officers have worked very hard to get this on the agenda, and there's a commitment from me and the team that we will make space on future standards committee agendas to have further discussions about it. But this was where we wanted to start with it. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Are there any other questions? With no other questions then, perhaps we can go on to recommendation, please. That the Standards Committee recommends to full council that the revised Waverley Members Code of Conduct be adopted. Now, who is in favour of that?
Can I just confirm, are we voting via hands or via the yes button?
It would seem that most people have put their hand up.
Yeah.
Chairman, if you just ask if anybody would speak if they are against or abstain, then that would probably be easiest.
Yes, okay. So is there anybody here who disagrees with that recommendation? I can see no hands. Fiona?
No, I can't see any. No one's spoken up, so I think you can take that has been agreed by general assent.
Can I ask Daniel Bainbridge if he's happy with that?
Yes, Chairman, I am happy with that.
Thank you. So in that case, we'll move on to item 7. Now, the two parish councillors, Stefan and Tom, do you wish to leave? Do you wish to stay?
I think I'll leave. I've got another engagement fix, but thank you very much.
Yeah. Thank you very much for your attendance.
Yep, Mr. Chairman, I think I'll leave, and thank you very much. It was very interesting, and I hope you have a good rest of the meeting. So thank you.
Thank you for your attendance.
Thank you.
Okay, are we happy that now their machines have gone? They've gone?
Yes, Chairman.
Thank you. Sorry, I'm probably being a bit clumsy because I'm not used to doing this in quite such a technical way, but we seem to be getting through it. So item 7, which is the remote meetings protocol and procedure rules. As you all know, we are here as councillors on standards to ensure that Waverley can hold remote meetings with the aim of going forward. In these extraordinary times, we need to recommend that remote meetings and planning committees can operate in a proper manner. So if we can look at the agenda, and Peter, I'd be very much obliged. So Robin, I believe you're going to introduce this again.
I mean, thank you, Chairman. I think you've largely introduced it. The regulation, the regulations provide the ability for remote meetings to be held by local authorities. So we don't need to change our constitution to hold a meeting with remote attendance, which is good because we're doing that today and we've already done it once before. What this report does do is responds to those regulations, those provisions, by setting out some suggested new virtual meeting procedure rules for the council, and also some guidance for public Zoom meetings to try and make things run professionally and smoothly. So just to reiterate the point, none of this is absolutely required for us to be able to hold Zoom council and committee meetings, but it is good practice for us to review our procedure rules. And what we've decided as officers is to bring forward some proposals for virtual meeting procedure rules, which would apply whilst we're doing virtual meetings. So I hope that's enough of an introduction, Chairman. Thank you very much.
Thank you. Councillor John Ward, again, you had a question, you had a statement, question, whatever.
Thank you, Chairman. Yes, I obviously just wanted to view the proceedings and see how they went, but Robin has made a very valid point here, which I was going to make, that the government regulations actually allow us to go ahead and just do this. Many of the districts have taken these straight to their council and got on with it. We thought it would be a more open and, if you like, democratic way to take it through what is effectively Waverley's normal procedures, with one actually slight addition. We have discussed this obviously with the leaders of all the political parties. The executive has discussed it, and I am thoroughly happy that it is coming to standards where a broader, multi-party group of people can have a look at it and pick up anything we've missed and make proper recommendations. So I wish you well in your deliberations. And that's all I really want to say. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Councillor Ward. Fiona, we were talking about a timing mechanism that you said I would be able to hear. I'm afraid I didn't hear it.
Thank you, Chairman. That was because Councillor Ward only took a couple of minutes, so we didn't reach the 4-minute timer. If he, on the last item, if he wants to speak for his full 4 minutes and a few seconds longer, then you should be able to hear the timer.
Okay, do we get the 30-second warning again for the speaker, or?
No, I'm afraid we can't manage with my phone a 30-second warning as well, but we can make sure that the 4-minute timer is heard on the meeting.
Thank you. So taking it forward, questions from councillors. Are there any questions? I'm looking for hands up. Councillor Goodrich.
Thank you, Chairman. I'm not quite sure, just a procedural point. We're putting our hands up on the machinery. It seems to me that we need to either do it like this, or we go through Dan Bainbridge, who is, I think, recording the hands up, but I only mentioned that. I mean, I think this virtual meeting procedure rules has been very well prepared. I think the guidance notes and to it as well are very helpful, which says, for example, that all councillors not speaking should mute themselves, Brian, so that you know that happens. The one question I have on VMPR1, as I understand it in little a, it says where called by the chair. I understand what we mean by that is the mayor, and this is for annual meetings. So why have we put chair and not mayor? Because in our situation, the chair of the council is the mayor. It might be clearer if we put mayor than chair, which might be regarded as chairman of what. And therefore, I think for simplicity, it would be better to put mayor.
Robin, I think we had that in the briefing. Did you want to answer that?
Yeah, it does refer to the mayor being the chairman of the council. On the previous point made about how members of this meeting are putting their hands up. So in terms of indicating to speak, you can either use the hands up function within Zoom, or if you've got any difficulties with that, you can raise your hand on the screen, but it's better to use the hands up function within Zoom. In terms of voting by general assent, if I could just make the general point, it will be helpful if there is something audible so that members of the public who are watching the YouTube stream, who are only focusing in on whoever's speaking at the time, because that's the way the format works, will be able to clearly hear that when votes are agreed, for example. So either everybody needs to say agreed, or the chairman needs to confirm that everybody has agreed. One of those two will be fine.
Yes, okay. I'll try and take that on board. Does that answer your question, Councillor Goodrich?
The first part, yes, Daniel, I think, has got the ability to unmute us all, and it seems to me when we're getting to a vote, it would be good if we were all automatically unmuted. We vote and then we automatically get muted again after it's happened. That seems to me a slicker way of doing it rather than all fumbling for our mute buttons.
I'm quite happy to experiment and try it. So
yeah,
when we put this for recommendation, we'll try that.
So I am suggesting that as it is the mayor in VMPR1, that we change the word chair and insert the word mayor.
Robin, are you happy with that?
I'm happy with that, subject to any other members' comments. Yep.
Okay, so let's try a vote on that. Is there anybody raising their hand to comment on that?
Chairman,
I have my hand raised.
Chairman, if it assists, I think the most straightforward way, rather than have a mix of hands up on screen and on Zoom, is that I can see everybody's hands up here. Councillor Goodrich, your hand is still up, but I then have Councillor Follows, Councillor Gray, Councillor Peter Marriott and Councillor Hyman with their hands up. I do not have the ability to mute people, but Linda does. And if we find that there are feedback issues, background noise issues, then in this room we will do that, Chairman, just for you to reassure you. But those are the people with hands up: Councillor Follows, Councillor Gray, Councillor Marriott, and Councillor Hyman.
Councillor Follows.
Thank you, Chair. Just to also echo some of the comments of the leader, I think that the purpose of this coming through standards was so that it got the full scrutiny and eye of the rest of the council, because although these things could have been put through, we wanted to make sure that it was done properly. And there were many of us who were concerned that government regulations would be open to abuse. And we wanted to make it clear that they would not be abused and that they would be done properly and with the consent not just of all of the administration parties, but with all parties and members through this process. I have a couple of questions and a couple of other points. In regards to the suggestion made by Councillor Goodrich, can the monitoring officer and Borough Solicitor just confirm that the change out between chair and mayor has no other substantive difference in the outcome? And certainly for B, the change to mayor does not prejudice the rights under B in any way. Just in case, I don't believe it does, but I just want to confirm that. In regards to the other elements of this, the only other section I wanted to just flag was VMPR 6 in terms of remote voting. So it's now an established principle in some of our committees that we log votes so that it is clear which councillors have voted for what on our website. And I was just wondering if monitoring officer could elaborate how remote voting would be logged and if it will be logged in that way, in the way that we've become used to, and I think in a way that is most transparent for our residents.
Okay, Robin, can you answer the first part of that the change of the mayor does not have any other implications?
Change to the mayor doesn't have any other implications. No, the reference there to chair means chair of full council, which does mean the mayor, so it amounts to the same thing. Do you want me to answer the second point?
Yes, please.
I mean, and so basically, unless we're doing voting by general assent, as we're doing tonight, if we're using the voting system on Zoom, that will be recorded on the Zoom call, and we will record it in the minutes in the way that we usually do. Anything beyond that, I'm happy to hear suggestions, but we will certainly be recording the outcome of a recorded vote when it is recorded.
Thank you. And otherwise, just to my final point, the standardization of the protocol for how we run these meetings is obviously extremely important. The fact that we can run them is one thing, but the way they're managed in a way that everybody, not just members, but also public, get used to is obviously really important, so that we can all work through this. And I just want to very quickly say thank you to the officers who have put in an extraordinary amount of work, both in IT and democratic services, to get this to this point in the speed that they have, because actually I think it's worked really well up to now.
Thank you. Councillor Gray, I think you were next.
Thank you, Chairman. Just a couple of points. One, in terms of presentation, can we make sure that each of these documents does have a version or a date? I presume we will, as we're going to put them through council, we'll end up with them all being dated at the date of the council meeting. Could perhaps Robin confirm where they'll be filed? So if someone was basically coming as a member of public and looking at the Constitution, do these get filed with the Constitution, part of the Constitution, or any other way that he perhaps could suggest? One point on the contents, and it comes under both this and the processes, it's the procedure for letting people back in. I mean, we say in here that, I think it's VMPR 7, members are excluded and they go off. I'm not sure what the process is of telling them that they can come back in, because they can't listen to they shouldn't be listening to the meeting. So what is that process? So basically version control, where's it going to sit in front of the Constitution, and the procedure for letting people back in? Thank you.
So through you, Chair, do you want me to answer those questions?
Yes, please.
I'll take the second one first, just to be difficult. So, I mean, when somebody leaves the virtual meeting room because they have an interest, they switch off their video feed, they switch off their audio feed. So although they can hear what's going on in the room, they can't influence it in any way. And to be honest, that's as good as we can do, because we are, unless there's a matter being discussed and exempt, all these proceedings are broadcast on YouTube for anybody to look at. So there would be no function at all, no value in asking the member to cut their connection to the meeting, because they can watch it via another channel. But by having their video and audio feed off, they cannot influence it in any way, which is the reason why in normal life we ask members to leave the room when they have an interest. That answers that question.
And the second one?
The second question was about where the virtual meeting procedure rules would sit. Is that correct? The answer to that is that they would sit as part of the Constitution. And we will need to publish them more widely than that to make it helpful and easy to find, but they sit as part of the Constitution for as long as they're in force. The guidance slightly less so, but the procedure rules are part of the Constitution.
Can I ask, is that on the website, so that if a member of the public did want to find it under these new rules, would that be a very quick link to find?
Yes, we'll make it, the Constitution is under the website, but I'll also suggest to the team that we put the virtual meeting procedure rules and the guidance somewhere very easy to find on the website, so that anybody accessing online meetings can find them very easily without having to go via the Constitution.
Thank you very much.
Robin.
Are there other questions? I'm losing who's next.
Chairman,
Could I just come back? I mean, the question of dating and version, it's quite important. I mean, some of these documents don't have dates on them, and some have dates like the 19th of March. So can we just bring that as an admin procedure up into some form of consistency?
Yeah, happy to, Chairman. Yep. Thank
you very much. Next speaker, who's next?
Councillor Peter Marriott was next, Chairman.
Councillor Marriott.
Thank you, Chair. Could I ask a question of the officers? Are they happy with the security aspects of using Zoom for video conferencing? The reason I ask is I'm aware of other Zoom meetings that have taken place where people have hacked into the meeting largely just to be disruptive, but on one occasion to insert pornographic images. So is there a problem with our Zoom meetings on that aspect? Thank you.
Chairman, do you
Robin,
want?
yep.
Chairman, I'm sat with Linda Frame here. She's out of view and managing this process. Yes, as officers we are. The meeting is now locked. So once all of the councillors in this who are entitled to be in this meeting were in, the meeting is locked and other people cannot join. And just as with the executive last week, we make sure that anybody else who might appear in the waiting room is somebody who's entitled to be in the meeting. So there is that reassurance in terms of security. And just more generally, officers, across democratic services and the IT service have worked very hard over the past few weeks to look at this and to make sure that proceedings are secure, while at the same time making sure that the general public are allowed the necessary access to meetings to ensure that they can participate where they're entitled to, and as a minimum be able to hear and view meetings. So yes, Chairman, you do have that reassurance, and Linda is nodding her head here.
Thanks very much. That does satisfy me. Who was next, Daniel?
I believe it was Councillor Hyman next, Chairman.
Councillor Hyman.
Thank you, Chairman. Yes, are we looking at the amendment to VMPR1 at the moment, or are we looking at the lot? Can you just clarify that quickly?
As far as I was aware, we're doing the report.
The whole lot, okay. Right, yes, under A, VMPR1A, we're called by the chair or the mayor, whichever it happens to, whatever word, in consultation with chief executive group leaders. There is quite clearly an interest there that the chair has in such a decision. The existing mayor is perhaps, well, certainly in a position where they have an interest in whether they continue or not, i.e. whether or not a meeting is called in order to replace them. So I'm very, very uncomfortable about it. I don't know the solution, and I'm wondering what officers have considered. But I really don't think something that's, and now I also appreciate that part B, following a resolution calling for an annual meeting being passed at an extraordinary meeting of the council. Well, the problem there, of course, is that if we're not having many meetings called, if the only one that we know of that's going to be held is on is it the 9th of June, 10th of June or something? I don't know whether there's time to actually, probably is just about time to put in a motion to the council meeting now, if that is the way of doing it. So I'd like to know, please, if we can have clarification on, in respect to VMPR1, how can we avoid the sort of personal interest under A, which exists, and what consideration's been given to that, because I'm uncomfortable there, and under B, how can we be sure that that opportunity to ask for an annual meeting to be held will be available to us. Now, as we've got to move on to the others, I'll have to be quick and rapid.
No, we need one at a time. Sorry, woo. Otherwise, we'll go everywhere. Robin, did you want to answer that?
Thanks, Chairman.
Thank you, Chairman. I've got no concerns at all with any issue of a personal interest at little point A. The mayor of the council, any mayor of the council, is required to act in the public interest, to be non-political and act in the best interest of the council. So again, a reminder that these virtual meeting procedure rules are really just our attempt to try and make sense locally at Waverley of the regulations. The regulations give the council more discretion on a temporary basis because of the coronavirus to not have to have the annual council meeting called at a particular time. So it gives us more discretion, and we can, as a council, use that discretion in the best way possible. I have no concerns over the mayoral role in that situation. And then in terms of the point B, to an extent, it's the same answer. So there's no legal requirement at the moment for point B to be followed. This is our suggestion as to how it might work. However, if there is a suggestion that the 9th of June be used as the as the annual council meeting. By the time we get to this point, it will be academic, but that's just the way it is. I'm not concerned about that because it's our own interpretation of those regulations, trying to make the best job of it that we can. But if timing overtakes, that won't be an issue.
Thank you very much. Councillor Hyman, did you want another question?
Absolutely. Now, I'm slightly confused as to how we are treating informal public questions. One of the most important rights that the public have, residents have, is to be able to pitch up at an executive or council meeting without notice and ask a question without notice, which they'll hopefully get an answer to. It's not used very often. It was in the past. It was taken away briefly, but it's back. This, to me, it is an essential part, particularly if we're if we're using other methods. If COVID-19 is in some way reducing participation and accountability, a loss of checks and balances in the system, then how does this affect the public questions? Can anybody rock up to one of our meetings and join in? Because that means we have to make the password public. It would be open in theory only to people who live in Waverley. I think, I'm not sure from the procedure rules, the current procedure rules, whether there's a limit on that. I thought there might be. That they can ask a question, they can participate, and people have to be able to hear them. I don't see from paragraph 8 on page 23, Chairman, other options considered, where it says that the regulations have an automatic amending effect on our existing rules. Yes, absolutely, I agree. But that means, as far as by my interpretation, that unless we change our procedure rules to remove the right to ask an informal question, we must include that in our executive and council meetings. And so, can you please clarify that? Are we removing that right to ask a question or not? Or do we need to think about that and change our procedure rules now, or call another meeting to do so?
Thank you, Councillor Hyman. Robin, are you able to answer that?
Yeah, so no, that right isn't being removed. The purpose of VMPR 5, remote attendance by members of the public, is basically members of the public's right to attend and participate remains the same, but the means by which they can do that has changed. And yes, we have put in some wording there around, will be deemed to have left the meeting if the following conditions are met. That's to make sure that that the meeting continues to run smoothly and that we know what to do if a member of the public joins and then leaves. We are looking at that possibility now rather than waiting for it to happen. But the straightforward answer is that public participation is not being removed by these proposals.
Thank you very much.
So, Chairman, to clarify, we are going to be making these meetings, the IDs, the Zoom meeting IDs for any executive and any council meetings. We are going to be making the ID and the password public so that anybody can then join before the meeting starts and ask to, and obviously we only have to take a quarter of an hour's worth, I think is the rule, isn't it? And if that's the case, we acted unconstitutionally at last executive meeting because we didn't allow that. So, I'm not going to say, big problems, we ought to do something about, go back in time and correct that. It would make no difference. I'm saying if we need to make sure it doesn't happen again, we've got a council meeting, which we're going to be having. Lots of people can ask questions there and may like to. So can you confirm that is what we're going to do? We're going to make the ID and password for the Zoom meeting public, and anyone can come along and they can ask a question if they can fit it in within the first quarter of an hour of the meeting, I presume. Is that the case? And
thank you. Robin, have you got an answer to that?
So, Chairman, can I suggest that Fiona Cameron can answer that one? I know she has the answer, so easier for her than me.
Fiona.
Thank you, Chairman. Yes, we are very aware that there is a wish to retain the informal questions, and the fine detail of that hasn't been worked out, I admit, but the intention is that there will still be a mechanism via Zoom And we have, in terms of the security, we have the facility through the waiting room function to allow people into the meeting to ask a question, and we then have the facility to remove them from the meeting when they have finished asking their question. So we do still have control over the meeting, and at the point that so they will be allowed in sort of one by one, effectively, is how I anticipate. I'm sure that you'll appreciate that we're all trying to work out the new arrangements using Zoom or whatever video platform as we go along. So no, I'm afraid it wasn't impossible to put those arrangements in place for the executive meeting last week. But equally, anyone who wants to ask an informal question, they are asked to register beforehand in the 15 minutes before the start of the meeting. And we didn't have any contacts before the start of the meeting indicating that someone was trying to ask an informal question. If they had, we would have done our best to accommodate it on the night. Equally, we've had no requests for formal written questions, but the intention is that if we do get any requests, we obviously have that person's details. We will be able to allow them into the meeting for them to ask their question, and the same approach will be used for public speaking at the planning committees. Those speakers have to register in advance. We have their details. We can email them the details of the Zoom meeting and how to join it. We will know who we're expecting to see arrive in the waiting room. What it does preclude is a last minute change by a speaker, which we've had sometimes when they've not been able to get to the council chamber, but hopefully joining remotely will reduce the likelihood of that happening, because they're not going to get stuck in traffic sort of trying to get to Godalming. So we are doing our best to sort of keep the procedures and the arrangements for meetings as close as possible to what they would be if we were all in the council chamber. It's just the way that they're actually sort of put into effect that is what's changing. Thank you, Chairman.
Thank you for that. Are there any more questions from anybody?
Chairman, there are a number of speakers still. Can I just address one point before I give you the names? Just regarding last week's executive meeting, just to confirm that the process that we undertook in respect to that meeting and this meeting fully accords with the 2020 regulations regarding remote meetings. So the ability for people to see the meetings and be heard if they have a right to be heard at the meeting, they will fully comply, just for your reassurance. I've still got Councillor Hyman with his hand up, but I suspect he may not have put it down yet. I've then got Councillor Adams, Councillor Knowles, Councillor Penny Marriott and Councillor Follows.
Okay, Councillor Adams.
Can you hear me now?
Yeah, I can hear you.
Thank you. I just wanted to say actually that I thought these procedures were very well written and precisely written. So if that's a result of having to do them quickly, let's have some more that are done quickly. Thank you very much.
Thank you for that comment, like that. Councillor Knowles.
Thank you, Chairman. There's a couple of items that I'd just like to raise on BMPR2 access to information. Seems to lock it down to you've got to search for it on the Waverley website no matter what. And then on page 30, access to documents, printed copies will not normally be circulated other than to committee members and substitutes, nor will they be available for inspection at the council offices. I just need to ensure that they are going to be, because you can't do this and look at an iPad at the same time. If you're a committee member, it is essential that they are, not that they might be, as this kind of indicates. We need printed copies because you can't do this. And also, we've seen this evening, glitches happen all the time, and the next thing you find, it's disappeared anyway. So I do think that we need to be very open and be able to see what we're talking about, and that is very important for all of us. Chairman, at one point you said something about so noting that it's easy to find on the Waverley website. That's the first time I've ever heard anybody say that. I think most things are fairly difficult to find. Thank you.
Okay, Fiona, have you got an answer to that?
Yes, Chairman. Fully appreciate Councillor Knowles that even for those members who have previously said that they are happy to use ModGov and not have paper copies of papers, we are sending them paper copies of papers unless they have subsequently said that they're happy to use Zoom and have the ability to split their screen or have two screens available. So, and I'm only aware of 2 councillors who've confirmed that they're able to do that. So if you're a committee member or you're a substitute member of a committee, you will automatically get the papers, no question about that. But what we're not going to do is automatically send all 57 councillors a copy of every agenda, regardless of whether they are on the committee or not. The papers are published online, and the regulations have removed the requirement, the sort of historical requirement that was set out in the 1972 Act for there to be a paper copy available for inspection at the reception, effectively. Not that anyone ever in sort of recent memory has actually come in and asked to see an agenda in that way. So yes, the onus is on sort of publishing online, which we've been doing anyway. Yes, we will provide paper copies for members of the committee and substitutes. And in terms of not having additional copies, you'll recall that the council building at the moment is not open to the public. Most people are attending, in fact, all councillors are attending the meeting remotely. And so there's nobody sort of additional, apart from the members of the committee, who would be needing an extra paper copy. So we're trying to sort of minimise excess costs by not printing extra copies that of agendas that then just end up in the shredding. But I hope that reassures you that if you're a member of the committee or you're a substitute member, you will definitely get a paper copy.
Thank you very much for that. Can I ask for that to be circulated to all members so everybody is aware of how they get it, or indeed if they get it?
Yes, absolutely. And we're also happy to circulate a PDF document of an agenda as well, if that makes it easier for members to look through electronically rather than looking on ModGov, for example. But I do appreciate when you're in the meeting like this, you may not have 2 screens and you just need to have a paper copy in front of you. And we fully accept that, and that overrides our sort of aspirations to go sort of more paperless. You know, this is as we're always being told, this is extraordinary times, and we have to sort of make arrangements that are suitable for them.
Yeah, I would agree with that, because as chairman, I find it difficult. I needed that paper copy to try and follow. Thank you. I next have Councillor Marriott, Benny Marriott.
It's just a question. These rules and procedures make it these are necessary so that we can have a remote meeting. Is it? Does that mean we have to have a remote meeting? So, for example, Parliament is back on June the 2nd, apparently. So if the same sort of thing was made available to us, is it still possible to use the previous constitution to hold meetings in the council chamber if we needed? So these don't supersede the constitution, they are alongside the constitution. Is that right?
So, Chairman, if I may.
You may, yep.
The intention would be that virtual meetings procedure rules would be, you know, active so long as there is any degree of virtual remote attendance. So at the moment, our meetings are 100% remote. In the future, it may be that there would be a mixture of physical attendance and remote attendance. And in those situations, I think that the virtual meeting procedure rules would still need to stand. So we will keep that under review as we go forward, really. The other thing to say, obviously, is that the council has to make sure that whilst we're in any interim period where we're, for example, not on full lockdown, but are not yet in a position where we can have everybody coming back together, we need to make sure that we provide safe facilities for councillors to use. So regardless of what the regulations say, regardless of what the government says, we also have a duty as an organisation to make sure that as and when there is any degree of partial physical attendance, that it is done in a safe way. So that's what we'll be doing.
Thank you. And yes, I must say from my own circumstances, because of the wife's underlying health, then I am totally shielded. So I could not attend Waverley for any meeting. So yes, I would appreciate at some point in time mixed meetings if the government start to relax the rules. Thank you. Who's next? Sorry.
Councillor Follows was next, Chairman.
Councillor Follows.
Thank you, Chair. Just to quickly comment on Councillor Marriott's point there, that was actually something that Robin and I were discussing only this afternoon, because actually some of the new remote methods that we now have, it addresses some of the access to democracy issues that we were already sort of talking about. And so the idea that we should be prepared for some level of mixed participation in person and remote is something very much, I think, that we should be thinking about in the future, assuming the government don't remove the right for councillors to attend and vote in this manner in the future. And I do hope they don't. I can also just reassure Councillor Hyman on behalf of the exec that we restored a number of these informal public speaking rights, and I don't see them being impinged by this process. It's just working out the technical details. We want those rights to be maintained. For Councillor Knowles, whilst I acknowledge that we do need to make papers available, and I'm glad that's been reaffirmed, please don't assume all members want them. I don't want physical papers, and I haven't wanted physical papers for a long time. And so I am one of the ones that has opted out. And so please don't assume that everybody does want them. But if you do want them, I hope you get them.
Thank you very much. Daniel, have you got who's next?
Chairman, Councillor Hyman and Councillor Adams still have their hands up. I don't know whether those are new hands, so to speak.
Councillor Adams?
Apologies, Chairman, I should have put it down.
Thank you. Councillor Hyman?
Yes, thank you, Chairman. Yes, the answers that I've received, I'd just like, I thank Councillor Paul Follows, of course, for his response. Can you please tell us, or the leader perhaps, give us an absolute assurance that we will maintain the informal public questions? Because if there's problems, perhaps this meeting is premature. Surely we should be, if we're going to have to change things, then we should be looking at that now. This should have been done in advance. I understand the constraints and whatever, but it is a matter of process, and it's our job to ensure that the residents don't lose any of their rights, and that the checks and balances are maintained. The ultimate question to me, we've got the issue in VMPR 4, which I want to refer to, where certainly if you're in a regulatory meeting, I think it's vital that we know that somebody is in the room. It's also vital that we ensure that they are doing the electronic vote themselves and they're not letting their grandchild come along and press the button or something fun like that, because of course we simply can't see who's doing what. So I'd like to know, how do we police that, the check, making sure someone is there listening in the room, which of course we can do when we're in a planning or regulatory meeting in the real world, but it's difficult to do here. And the biggest risk that I see in this system, and it's not anybody's fault, but it's a risk of the system, is if I or anybody else is in a position, particularly a member of the public that we serve, where they are saying, I wish to attend, but have been cut off. I wish to attend, I can't get in. I can't be get back in or whatever. How do we ensure that that person is instantly able, or not instantly, but very quickly whilst the meeting is going on rather than the next day or whatever, able to make contact and state, I wish to be there, i.e. you should be holding this meeting up. If they are carrying on, but you can't get back in.
Thank you, Councillor Hyman. I think we got the gist of that. There's a number of questions you raised, obviously. I'm willing to allow Councillor John Ward, if he wishes as leader, to answer one of those in this meeting. Councillor Ward, do you wish to answer that?
Yes, Chairman, I'd be quite happy to. We are in an emergency situation. We are in areas none of us have ever been before. And I take the view that we are all doing our very best to adapt to this new situation and to look after and support our residents and our fellow councillors to the best efforts that we can. So yes, part of our election pledge was more openness, and that we would enable members of the public to hold us to account and ask us questions. And it is certainly our intention that that should happen. However, the idea that we cannot have a single meeting until we have reached technological perfection, I'm afraid, I find a ridiculous idea. We are going to do our best. Things will go right, things will go wrong, but we will get there, and we will get there as soon as we possibly can. You know, I think perhaps Councillor Hyman's been watching Who Wants to Be a Millionaire a little bit too often, where they check that a camera crew is actually in the house of the person who is being rung up. So I will have a chat to the Crime Commissioner and see if we can get 57 policemen to sit in everybody's house to make sure they are doing things properly. But there is a certain time when, you know, we have to rely on a little bit of integrity. We're not going to get everything right. Yes, we will make mistakes. Yes, things will be delayed, but we are doing our very best, and we are not going to await technical perfection. We are as good as we can be. If someone gets knocked out of a meeting, it's really no different than if someone's car breaks down on the way to a meeting. We are not going to scrap the meeting until they have the chance to get back. We are going to take a pause. We are going to do our very best to get them back, but we are not going to stop everything that is the democratic right of the majority just because one guy's internet goes down. I'm really sorry, but that is the fact of life, and that is one of the results of this dreadful disease. We are doing our very best, and really I don't want to keep tripping over minute procedural details. I want to do our very best for everybody. Thank you.
Councillor Ward, thank you for that full and frank answer.
Chairman.
Daniel, was there anything you wanted to add?
Yes, please. That's really helpful. Thank you, Chairman. Just in terms of that point of letting people back in, just going back to what I said earlier about the security of the meeting, it's the same process. So if somebody drops out and wants to come back in, be that a member of the public or a councillor, then obviously they will come into the waiting room, and the person in control of the meeting, the officer, will let them back in if they, provided they are entitled to be in the meeting. So that's all fine. Just in terms of BMPR, just looking at it, it does fully comply with the remote meetings regulations. So the ability to hear, where practical, see and be heard, and so on. That's all direct from regulations. And just to reassure you, and really pick up on the point that Councillor Ward has made there. What we're doing now in terms of video is really the regulations implemented at their highest level. The regulations allow the most basic form of participation in a remote way, which really could be at its most basic teleconference, and people simply being able to hear, that's members and members of the public as well. So what you have here really is the council implementing those regulations at their best. And it seems to be working very well, seems to have worked very well last week and tonight. So VMPR really does accord with regulations. In terms of the question about what might happen in a councillor's home as they are taking part in the meeting, Robin and I and Fiona have discussed this and discussed it in the context both of the open part of the meeting and any exempt material. And it comes back to the fact that we, members, we are relying on the compliance and the honesty of members to ensure that they are, surrounding themselves with the necessary protections to ensure that they're compliant with the law and with their codes of conduct. And the same applies to any officers who are taking part in meetings remotely as well, be that here in Committee Room 1 or at home. And just in the same way that we rely on members to ensure the security of pink pages and confidential papers in a hard copy and in a physical meeting, So we will rely on them to do that in a remote setting. And obviously, if there's any suggestion that members aren't complying with the code of conduct, then it comes back to what we discussed in the last item, which is that that members can be taken through a process. So I hope that picks up on those points. That's all I wanted to say. Thank you, Jamie.
Thank you for that clarification. Unless there are any burning issues, obviously I would like to bring this to a close. Councillor Goodrich, I see your hand is raised.
And also Councillor Knowles has his hand raised.
Councillor Goodrich?
Yes, I put my hand up electronically. In simple terms, when we're dealing with regulatory committees, and that if we're to vote, we've got to be there the whole time, this is where the audio stream, the video stream is important, because members of the public for this meeting, for example, can see that we're all here. And if suddenly I disappeared off the screen for half an hour or 20 minutes in the middle of a planning application, everybody can see I've disappeared. Or if I block out my screen so that I'm, for example, Mark Merriweather's attending this meeting, but has quite rightly shut off his his video screen, because that's the new protocol that we're putting in. It's not a problem. We don't need 57 policemen, because we're policing ourselves, because everybody, we're policing each other, because we can see ourselves here.
Thank you very much. Councillor Knowles.
Thank you, Chairman. It's just, this is a comment, and because of what was said about holding meetings, rushing back to holding meetings in the council chamber, I'm quite alarmed that I've heard that. We all know the number of deaths there's been. There's been nearly 100 deaths at the Royal Surrey, over 300 at Frimley Park, and to suggest that we're going to start going back in the council chamber early, I was horrified to hear that, and I'd like that recorded, because that is not what this is about. You go into that building, you're going to touch things, you're going to go through doors. It is far too dangerous, and until we have absolute security that that this is safe again, I was horrified at hearing that. I'm also glad to know that Councillor Follows is one of the 2 out of 57 that doesn't want papers, but the 55 probably do. Thank you.
Thank you, Councillor Knowles. Are there any other hands raised? Daniel?
Sorry, is it okay if I just respond to Councillor Knowles' point there? I wasn't sure if you were referring, Councillor Knowles, to what I said previously, but I absolutely agree with you. We are not looking at a rush back to the council chamber, and what you said is completely correct. We are looking at making sure that the council's facilities are, improved, so that in the longer term we can do so, but there is no immediate prospect of people coming back into the council chamber for meetings, and we won't be doing that until we're certain that it's safe to do so. So I hope that provides some reassurance, because if that came across from me, that wasn't certainly the intention.
No, I myself took it the fact that we weren't rushing to come back. It was more like planning when and if it happens, but then presumably that will be guided by the government. Thank you, Daniel. Are there any other more raised hands?
No, Chairman, there aren't.
Okay, in that case, let's go on to the recommendation, please. It is recommended that the remote meetings protocol and procedure rules, as set out in Annex 1, is recommended to full council for adoption. Now, by voting this way, can we agree?
Are you going to incorporate chair being changed to mayor?
I think we said that, didn't we?
I don't think it's been agreed that I'm aware of.
Robin, did we agree that?
There seemed to be agreement. There didn't seem to be any disagreement to that, and a number were agreeing. So I suggest, Councillor Rubini, that when you're putting the recommendations to the committee now, that you do it on the basis that that word is amended, unless anybody at this point wants to indicate that they did disagree with that amendment.
I didn't hear anybody against it. Okay, so we're now adding that the mayor replaces chair. It is recommended that remote meetings protocol and procedure rules, as set out in Annex 1, is recommended to full council for adoption, plus, of course, any typos that would be altered. I'd like to agree that. Can we all agree that?
Agreed.
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 Is there anybody now who does not
I wish
agree?
to abstain on this, Chairman. I haven't had the answers that I would expect. So if I may abstain on the grounds that I didn't get an answer to the issue of I wish to attend but have been cut off. If a member is unable to attend a meeting, the question was, how do we ensure that the meeting knows that they want to be part of the meeting but are not able to be? And a premature, of course, to agree something without knowing whether it's practical or workable. And I think we've got to, you know, we're the people who are meant to be representing the residents, and I think we should be looking at those before we make a decision, because under, what was it, 8.2, it says the other main option is, that's on page 23, is to not hold any any meetings, and there is still a question as to whether or not we should be doing. Thank you.
Okay, we've noted your abstention and why. What I suggest is that perhaps only you could write to Councillor Hyman on an email, or ourselves and me as chairman, to make sure that we're happy with that answer. So we have agreed that. Or is there anybody who disagrees? I hear nothing. Is anybody else want to abstain apart from Councillor Hyman? No, then as I understand it, we have passed that. Thank you. If we could now move on to item 8 on the agenda, the new planning committee's temporary arrangements for 2020-21. Robin, I think you are presenting this again, please.
Thank you very much, Chairman. So the report sets out the establishment on a temporary basis of 2 planning committees, Western and Eastern. The report sets out the proposed arrangements at section 4. It also sets out proposed terms of reference for the committees. The proposed arrangements would, under these proposals, be kept under review and would cease when the council chooses to remove them, or would cease on the 7th of May 2021, which is when the government regulations are due to fall away, unless that changes, whichever of those things happens sooner. So they either automatically fall away when the regulations do, or they fall away because council takes them away. And that is essentially the sunset clause, as has been described before, to this arrangement. Thank you, Chair.
Thank you. Councillor John Ward, again, you wanted to raise something?
I just wanted to say a few words on this with your indulgence, Chairman. Thank you for the challenge of testing Fiona's magic bell. I will probably not speak for that long. You'll be glad to hear. Planning is always one of the most difficult, emotional, long-winded, and time-consuming things that we and many other councillors seem to undertake. Clearly, it is because it is so important to the public in the way that they can conduct their lives, and us in the way we can respond to government strictures to build sufficient houses. The executive have, I think, talked this to death, and we have discussed it widely with other party leaders. I'm sure we haven't come up again with perfection. I'm sorry, but I think this is a good arrangement, and I really would be interested in your looking at it carefully and coming up with any amendments that you feel that are necessary. Might I ask you and suggest, because one thing seemed to have slipped through unless I misread it. At one time, we are having a greater number of local councillors on these committees, which increases the chances of a member of the committee having an application come up in their ward for which they have been obviously heavily canvassed by their ward members. And I seem to remember we were looking at suggesting or even ruling that a ward member should absent himself from the voting, if not from the committee, during the discussion of something in his ward or her ward, such that they didn't feel pressurized into any form of predetermination before the meeting, and felt that they could openly and fully discuss with their residents their views on an application. And if I missed it, my apologies, but if not, I would ask the committee to consider perhaps inserting a clause that prohibited or released a ward member from the obligation of voting on something in his/her ward, such that they could then make a more impassioned plea on the behalf of their ward members. And I think I'm failing in my filibuster because I'm not getting near Fiona's bell. So with that plea, I will say thank you for your indulgence.
Lovely, thank you for that. Did you want to come back on that, Robin?
I don't think so, Chairman. I think that's a suggestion that's been put into the meeting for members to debate. So happy to clarify anything later in the debate, but I think first of all it would be for members to comment.
Thank you. I have Councillor Follows. He's the first hand I saw.
Thank you, Chair. Just to also comment that this, a lot of us didn't want to be having to discuss planning regulations, obviously, and it's been put upon us by government, and I want to make that clear, that we've really had to do this as a result of that intention to keep this going, even though we'd have rather deployed it to more useful community objectives. That being said, there has been significant discussion amongst the group leaders. It was then obviously incumbent upon each group leader to make it clear within their groups how that was going to work and to have those discussions. I can certainly say for the group I lead that discussion was a very vibrant one and one that went on for a few days. So from my perspective, it's had a significant amount of discussion. The addition of a sunset clause for me seals the deal on making this a reasonable arrangement. Certainly, I actually do believe that 5 committees that we have at present are grossly over the top anyway. So this is a much more sensible suggestion. I also do believe that Councillor Ward's point in regards to the role of the ward member in this is entirely valid. And obviously, I will wait for others to comment on this, but I'm more than happy to propose that addition into this particular section. Thank you, Chair.
Thank you.
Chairman, if I can just sort of interrupt at that point and say that in drawing up these terms of reference for the temporary planning committees, we're obviously aware of that discussion that sort of followed the peer review report and their observation regarding ward members. It hadn't come up as part of the discussion that was had between the group leaders regarding the temporary arrangements, and we as officers, in drawing up the arrangements, we're trying to keep things as close as possible to the existing arrangements and only changing what we have to because of the current circumstances. And I think that is a debate that there certainly wasn't consensus on that last time it was discussed by members. Some were very saw the benefits of it. There is always the opportunity for a ward member to decide if they really want to be sort of take a side and effectively predetermine an application. They are always at liberty to do that and to make that declaration. Effectively, that would be a non-pecuniary interest of sufficient weight that you have to sort of recuse yourself from the voting. But as a ward member, they still have they're still able to speak. They as an objector, they would still have the same right as a member of the public to object. So to a certain extent, it wasn't, given that there wasn't consensus amongst members, it wasn't a battle that we wanted to have at this point when members are wanting to get on with having planning committees and determining planning applications. That, you know, we're well aware that there are planning applications that are waiting to come through to committee, and we want to be able to facilitate that and having starting up planning committees as soon as possible. That's what the government wants, and we want to be able to do that without sort of setting hairs running unnecessarily at this point.
Chair, may I respond to that very briefly?
Yes.
Thank you. I'm willing to park that discussion so it can be had with the group leaders, because I think it is one that we possibly do need to discuss, because we've ensured that the rights of ward members to call things in have been retained. But there is a side discussion regarding the role of the ward member in planning applications themselves that probably does need a separate conversation before we come to full council. So I'm happy to park that for the moment. I would also just say I just disagree slightly with you there, Fiona. I don't think that a lot of members are rushing to want to do planning committees. The government are making us do this, and we're having to adapt to that accordingly. And that's why we're discussing this. But I don't think anybody, well, I'm not going to speak for everybody because I can't. A lot of members are not loving the fact that they have to do this at all.
Point taken. Thank you, Councillor Follows.
Thank you for that. Before we leave that point, obviously I would be in favour of leaving it to Paul Follows, etc., to discuss. Are there any other points you want to make about Councillor Ward's statement? I can't see any hands. Oh, there is one. Councillor Gray.
Thank you, Chair. I mean, what I wanted to say, and was really part of the discussion anyway, but it's based on Councillor Ward's discussion. I think there's a lot of people within the various political groups, as Councillor Follows said, had views, and I think everybody has on consensus said that these arrangements are needed for these times, and I think it's a compromise. I'd be very upset if there was a suggestion about ward councillors. I think there are some complexities about wards, and if you take my ward and Dunsfold Park and other things involved, that's a case in point. I think ward councillors like myself, I mean, I do have conversations with the monitoring officer because where I actually live is quite close and it's quite a close area. So there are discussions that take place. But in my ward, if we're going to have something in Chiddingfold has got a 3-4 mile gap between the two. It's not the same for me, as equally it's probably not the same for Anna James to be on the others. So I would be totally against rushing into that, excluding councillors. I think there's a lot of common sense, a lot of adherence to the code of conduct that already takes place. I can see it might be an embarrassment to some people who perhaps made commitments politically about things. It would be nice if they didn't have to attend and vote. But I think on balance, I think most ward councillors should comment and should remain above the prejudice in that. That's what I wanted to say on that. I do want to come back on the points, but perhaps on Councillor Ward's thing is perhaps someone would tell me why we've put a sort of end date of the 7th of May, which seems an awful long time away. And I would have thought something like the 7th of January or the 10th of January or a January council would be a good time, because maybe we need to extend it to September, but let's actually have a review of how well it's worked.
Chairman.
Thank you. Yep.
Can I just pick up the point about the 7th of May and then let you know who else has their hand up?
Yes, please.
So the 7th of May date, the 2021 date, reflects the date in the regulations. That's the end date within the regs. So beyond that, those regs no longer apply in terms of the deferral of annual council meetings and the remote meetings regulation. So that's the ultimate end date. But of course, this council can set whatever sunset clause or review clause it wishes to. So that's why the 7th of May date appears there, and we can't go beyond it. Just in terms of other councillors who have their hands up on Zoom, Councillor Goodridge, Councillor Penny Marriott, Councillor Hyman, Councillor Knowles, Councillor Follows and Councillor Adams, but I'm happy for you to come back to me.
Thank you. I think I saw Councillor Penny Marriott. Councillor Penny
Michael
Marriott?
was before me, I think.
Yes, Councillor Goodridge was first, Chairman.
Sorry, Councillor Goodridge.
Thank you, Chairman. Well, I agree with fellow members that I'm disappointed that we are going to have to make planning decisions during this period, but on the basis the government say we have to, then I'm content for the changes to 2 planning committees, provided it is temporary, provided it is recognised that either on the 7th of May 2021 or such earlier date as the council can decide, that we revert back to the 5 committees, which when they were put in place were extremely popular with the local inhabitants, because they were anxious that planning applications that affected them would be discussed by people local who knew the area. So, but that's not what we're discussing. We're discussing whether this temporary arrangement should take place, and I'm happy for it to happen. I'm comforted by the fact that if we've missed anything out, and I'm sure Fiona's been very studious and hasn't, but if she has, then the current procedure rules are set out in our constitution will take precedence. So if we've missed anything out, we cover it by our existing constitution. I also think it's very, very helpful to have all the planning gumph, planning procedures, planning membership, planning speaking, everything on planning in one place, which we put together for this temporary arrangement. I hope that we might learn a lesson from this, and that when we go back to business as usual, that actually we have a look at, this committee has a look at the constitution and perhaps draws together all the planning matters so that it can more easily be found in one place. Because at the moment the constitution is not easy to find everything that relates to planning. We have other committees with everything drawn together, and it would be good to have planning as well. The point raised by the leader about local members not taking part, I think that's very contentious. I think what Fiona Cameron said is absolutely right. If a local member wishes to fly their flag to the mast at an early stage with local residents and say, whatever happens, I'm against this or I'm in favour of this, they're being very foolish. But if they do, then they're happy. It's happy for them to do so, but then they declare an interest. I've always in the past, if there's been something contentious in my patch, made it clear that I haven't formed an opinion, but I would like to listen to what everyone has to say, and I will decide myself how I vote, so that I'm not in any way curtailed. But I think the current rules, particularly with the Code of Conduct, actually does cover it, and that if people want to be, local member wants to be involved, they should be allowed to do so, and to exclude them does seem to me to give the wrong message that to the public, to say that your local member, who probably knows the situation better than most, should not take part in the debate and have nothing to do with it. Seems to me totally wrong. But that's not the rules at the moment. We're only dealing with the rules as they are at the moment. And I think just being simple and to ensure that we get two committees, these terms of reference are fine, and that we should adopt them, and on the basis that we go back to business as usual as soon as we can. Thank you.
Thank you for that. Councillor Penny Marriott.
Thank you. I was just wondering what happens in the sense of frequency of these meetings, because if you only have two planning committees instead of four, it stands to reason that each one therefore should have twice as many things going through it. Are these going to happen more frequently, or does that mean the delegated powers of the planning officers are going to be very overworked? Shouldn't that be written in, that the frequency of the meetings will be such that the same number of planning applications are covered? Thank you.
Chairman, I'm happy to respond to that.
Fiona, yeah.
Obviously with the delay since the last planning committees, which I think actually were the beginning of March, I think the lockdown prevented the planning committees that were scheduled for the end of March and beginning of April obviously were cancelled. So there is a bit of a backlog of planning applications that are ready to come forward. They fall outside the scheme of delegation, so they have to be decided by committee. So we have a little bit of a backlog of applications that are waiting to come forward to committee. In sort of responding to the government pressure that Councillor Follows has highlighted, that planning does continue, and we have obligations to applicants to determine their applications sort of within timeframes and as efficiently as possible. So the intention is that, assuming the planning committees are in this format are agreed by council, for the first possibly sort of 6 to 8 weeks, they will meet more frequently. They'll effectively meet every other week. So we'll have a Western one week, Eastern the following week, then Western, then Eastern, until we've got through the backlog. We're also very aware that feedback from other councils who have already started having planning committee meetings, they only have one planning committee anyway, so they haven't had to make any sort of special arrangements to sort of streamline their committee decision making. The feedback is very much that it takes longer to get through business on a Zoom meeting than it would do in person. Whether that's because of just sort of difficulty in spotting who has their hand up electronically. So we are speaking with the planning officers about ensuring that we don't have more than 3 or 4 items on an agenda at a time, and we certainly don't have 3 or 4 sort of very big contentious applications on an agenda. So it's not going to be like a joint planning committee with sort of 4 big applications on. And the planning officers have been going through and prioritising the planning applications that are ready to come forward to committee, to work out the priority for which order we take those. So that work is already going on in the background in anticipation that we'll be able to start with planning committees before the end of June. So that and then once we're through that backlog, then we will be working with the planning committee chairman and vice chairman and the head of planning to work out the appropriate time to either increase the time between the planning committee meetings, or to make a recommendation to council that we revert to the substantive 5 committee committee arrangements at an appropriate time.
Thank you. If it's any help, Councillor Marriott, I was at a meeting the other day with chairman and vice chairman, and we seem to agree that the frequency will be increased until we get rid of that backlog. And as was said, it'd be once a fortnight instead of once a month. Thank you. I now have Councillor Hyman, I believe.
Thank you, Chairman. Yes, we've got 4 recommendations in front of us, and I think it would be easiest if we were to take those and discuss each of them separately, because this is quite a big issue certainly to our residents, and as Councillor Goodrich says, certainly to it also affects a lot of councillors, and they care about the system deeply. And his proviso was that he said provided it's temporary. Well, is that temporary like Riverside 3 car park, where we've got a Regulation 3 application going through at the moment for something that was temporary, but of course is going to become permanent. And there are plenty of other things that I can think of over the past 15 years that I won't tell you with, where temporary things naturally tend to become permanent, or the aspects of them which we expected to become permanent did. So I don't think that your proviso there, Councillor Goodrich, is going to be satisfied necessarily. We cannot guarantee in here, and it would be unreasonable to do so, to say that this is not going to be only temporary. I thought that Councillor Follows told us, I've got my notes from the executive meeting, and I wrote down, quoted, all time limited emergency provisions to be reviewed at July Council. So I thought that's the promise we'd been made. And now it appears that we're probably talking about May, nearly a year later. I'm wondering what's gone awry there. Okay, particular issues.
Chair, may I offer a point of personal information on that one?
Yeah, I think we need to, yes, please. Yep. Councillor Follows.
Councillor Hyman, one of the things I was going to say when I raised my hand up, and I will still keep that hand up, was that we didn't want to specify a date because actually we think it's actually up to standards to determine that. I mean, the exec could have picked any old date off the top of our heads between now and when the regulations expire. So in fact, what the default position has been is we'll put the date that the regulations expire, and the expectation is that standards come to a decision as to when they think the review date should be. So effectively what we're doing here is actually putting that decision upon this committee. So my hope is that seized of that agenda, you will nominate a date to review it, but the default date has to be when the regulations actually expire. So we were mulling this around. We could have picked any date in the end, and we did discuss July, but really I think it needs to be for the standards committee as a separate and independent group to determine that date.
Thanks, Councillor Follows. Councillor Hyman, you had another question?
Thank you, Councillor Follows. That does clarify point recommendation 3, certainly. Recommendation 1 that we adopt this. I mean, we have to bear in mind we don't have to do this, and so unless this is absolutely right and is suitable for our residents, and we're doing our residents you know, a service by doing this, or preventing appeals for non-determination, which might otherwise be decided differently, which I'm not sure that is a great risk because we would get a say in it anyway. I do think we need to be very careful before we agree what we're doing. I think if we brought forward the issue of, hey, let's have 2 planning committees, if anything other than these COVID-19 times, then one political group in particular would be up in arms and would be kicking it out, and I'd probably be supporting that for some reasons, but possibly not the same ones. So you know, I am concerned. I would say that, you know, if we're going to make sure that our decisions are made properly, and we are not going to suffer any reduction in the standards of decision making, and it's just the nature of this system that makes it very difficult for us to take everything in and to I do feel like it makes absolutely no difference what any councillor says, as you know, the recommendations are going to get put through, and that isn't the way we should be approaching meetings and working as councillors, because we're here to represent the residents. The officers are representing the council's interests, and so there's always going to be an issue where do we agree or not, and that we have to be able to disagree. So you know, I do think that what I would ask is under 1, or for recommendation 1, the overall picture of it, I would be happy to agree this if there is if we can reach written common ground in advance of the meeting. I mean, the various issues which we can as councillors agree on. Normally we'd see the technical issues on the screen, and we'd simply be told about it in the meeting, and there'd be opportunities to discuss it and ensure, without changes to the code of conduct, that the truthfulness and accuracy of what's being put in place. Well, we need to make sure that's done well in advance of the meeting, so no one's messing around at the time trying to discuss. You know, I mean, the obvious example, which we all know about, is Waverley's position that we've got a compliant or complete appropriate assessment in the local plan, in local plan part 1. If we did, there wouldn't have been a moratorium. You know, we all know that's simply not true.
Okay, Councillor Hyman.
And I'm going to get shut down if I even mention that, because this is standard, as it's not our job to maintain standards. I understand that.
Okay, but, Councillor Hyman, can yes, we just keep the point, please?
Okay, so can I ask whether officers would accept, and I mean, obviously we're here to debate and change things, as in item 3, the date, if we can change if we want to, we've been told. I would suggest that we include in this a motion where members should reach common ground on technical issues in advance of the meeting, so that we don't have to cover those issues during the meeting. We've got a problem. I think there are a lot of large and fairly contentious applications which are likely to come forward at once, mainly Farnham, East Street, Woolmead, Coxbridge. We've got plenty. One out at Waverley Lane, all sorts. And if these are all going to be thrown together, officers, sorry, not the officers, the members of the planning committee are simply not going to have time to look at each of them properly if they're being brought forward. So on that issue, I'd like really let's demonstrate the openness that we're promising to our residents, and tell them when are we expecting these to come forward, to follow up what Councillor Marriott said, Councillor Penny Marriott said. When are we expecting which applications to come forward over the coming weeks and months, so we know what we're actually agreeing to here? Because to me, this could put an enormous strain on members who, frankly, if we were to have a system of common ground in advance, we'd be able to establish that actually Western won't have many things to do, and Eastern will only have to be taking care of the Dunsfold and Cranley issues, the things that are non-spa and non-air quality related.
Okay, thank you, Councillor Hyman. I know that the chairman of Western, for example, is aware of a lot of these things coming up, and I'm sure he'll work closely with the officers to make sure that they can actually get these things done. Is there an officer that wants to comment on Councillor Hyman?
Yes, please, Chair. If I can, I'll make 3 brief comments, and then I'll also run through those members who've got their hands up as well. In terms of the date by which these arrangements would fall away, I think that's, I mean, you said a moment ago, Councillor Hyman, that that's been clarified. The backstop date in here is when the regulations fall away, but ultimately it's for this committee to determine when they should fall away. Now, you could do that today, but the discussion so far has been on the basis of how would you know when they would need to fall away? So it's likely to be something that's going to be a more informed conversation in the future. So a more informed conversation by standards in the future, and then a council decision. That's the basis of the recommendation, but that's for councillors to debate. In terms of reaching common ground on technical issues prior to coming into committee, I don't really have any concerns about that. I mean, the committee is here to debate in public some of these key issues. So although the officers, try to canvass opinion and pull together different ideas in terms of what goes into the papers, ultimately, it is this committee's responsibility to put forward their own recommendations. So I don't have any concerns that there are issues and different points of view raised within this meeting, because that's the nature of democracy. Just want to make a point about, Councillor Hyman is completely right to say that there's no legal requirement to make this change. I just want to put forward an important point, which is there is an operational need for some sort of change. So although we have the ability with the regulations to hold remote meetings, the reason that this report is in front of you is because it's not realistic to run the current structure of planning committees using the remote setup. And so that's exactly why you've got this report in front of you. So technically you don't have to do this, but if you don't do this, there's going to need to be an answer as to how the various planning applications are managed, because it is operationally just too much to run that 5 committee system when we're having to do it remotely. Chairman, we've got Councillor Knowles,
Knowles, and then follows. Anybody else after that?
Yes, and then Councillor Adams, Councillor Gray, and Councillor Goodridge.
Adams, Gray, Goodridge. Thank you. So, Councillor Knowles.
Thank you, Chairman. I just want to go back. Got much of what when I put my hand up, Councillor Goodridge has already said, and the 2 committees are probably necessary, but for those that were on before 2007, there was 2 committees that were very unpopular, and the reason was the lack of local input. So any suggestion that local members wouldn't be involved, I would be very unhappy about. And I know it came from a peer review, but I also remember the peer review was heavily loaded with people who thought there shouldn't be local representation. It should be a Kremlin style of planning and just allow everything. And we can see that from the way government has behaved recently, when we're all locked indoors and allowed out half hour a day. It's all right if you're a builder or a developer, you can go out in vehicles together and do what you like. So I don't want us to be having these meetings either, but we're being pushed to it. But the loss of local representation would be an absolute disaster in my view. Thank you.
Yeah, I'd agree with that. Councillor Follows.
And thank you, Chair. I think I'll just clarify a couple of things. I think on Councillor Ward's point, I think that the point was not to exclude local members. It was actually to ensure that they could still speak at the beginning and end of debate, but in a way that allowed them to speak more freely without fear of predetermination. I think that was the intent of that. It wasn't in any way to exclude people in a way that would deprive them of representation. I think just going through some of the other comments, Councillor Goodridge mentioned this is this being packaged well. That is by design, and so the exec was already of a mind to review and merge some of these disparate planning issues anyway into something more accessible as part of the governance review group, which was being undertaken by myself, Zach, and Councillor MacLeod. So this is something that we're going to be pursuing further anyway after this, is to make these in a more packaged, accessible set of planning elements within the Constitution. Because I think actually this does highlight that does work a lot better and is much easier for members and the public to grasp what we're actually doing. I will just also respond to one of Councillor Hyman's points. I think agreeing common ground in private, I understand where you're coming from with that. I think it would eliminate a lot of the conflict and issues. But at the same time, to take that part of the debate out of the public domain is actually something I find quite difficult, considering the very openness and transparency that we're trying to bring to planning. A lot of that debate, as much as we can sit here and sometimes say the technical is black or white, I think all of us are aware that the technical is subject to interpretation, and that interpretation is a matter for councillors in the chamber and should be in public. In terms of, I think one thing I would just see if we can bring people back to is the discussion of a date for review. That May is too far. It might be the end of the regulations, but it is too far. And I personally think, I think it was Councillor Gray mentioned something like January 7th, which would probably be the first day of business in the new year. I would certainly support something like that, but I do think we should bring some suggested dates to the table, and so I'll start with that one of the first week of January.
Can I just clarify that in practice, I've got no view on that, but in practice, that is likely to mean a decision at a council meeting in December, because obviously early January, it will be too early to practically do it. So if you work backwards from there, it's likely to mean the Standards Committee meeting, in November. So
I would certainly have no objection to that, because I do think that proactive review of this is better than letting it lie. The only cost really is a little bit of time for officers and members, and I think it's one of those things. Planning is important enough, and the constitutional rules are important enough that it's our duty to ensure they're given more review, not less.
Thank you. Councillor Adams, I believe you were next.
Right, I agree with what's just been said. I think that we should decide more or less in December. That would have given us an opportunity to see if
Councillor Adams, you're breaking again.
Sorry. That would give us the opportunity to see if there is been a second wave of COVID-19 in the autumn, which is what some people are suggesting may happen. And if there isn't one, then I can see that it would be totally reasonable to terminate this structure in January.
Councillor Adams, we can't hear you again.
I'm not sure why that is, to be honest. I'm looking into the screen.
That's fine.
Definitely I'm muted. Okay, I'll start again. I agree that December is a good time to decide on whether we would want to remove these temporary committees in January, because, as I said, there's a suggestion that there may be a second wave in the autumn. So we would know by December if that second wave was occurring.
I'm sorry, you're going again.
If it doesn't occur, then we could certainly unwind them in January. So that was the first point. The second point is that as a member of a small rural area.
No, I'm sorry, but
yeah, I can quite see. I can see that the line is not being consistent around me. It is at the moment. As I say, I would, as a member for a small remote area which has 4 villages, I would definitely like my vote recorded in whatever system we have at the end of each planning request, because of course, if you then in the fund is by far the largest group, and they're all townies have a different view from people.
No, I'm sorry, you've gone again.
Yeah, I can see that. I don't know why it is. I'm back now, but those are my 2 points. Thank you.
I think we got them. Fiona, did you manage to catch those 2 points?
Yes, I think we've got those. Thank you, Councillor Adams. And if we have any difficulty, we'll follow up with you afterwards just to clarify. I think
Okay, no problem.
Your internet connection.
Okay, no problem. Thank you.
Thank you for that. I now have Councillor Gray.
Thank you, Chairman. Just on the points of getting through the work, and certainly they're going to be long meetings. These meetings are quite torturous. I would not like to think we're going to start at 7 and go through till 10 o'clock. I would certainly like to see some form of daytime usage of this, and also to do, I think Councillor Hyman's comments about getting some of the technical things cleared before is a good idea. I do agree with Councillor Follows, and the public wants us to be discussing, but we shouldn't be discussing whether a particular document has been returned or not. One of the issues we've had with certainly JPC things is getting updates within 24 hours of the meeting. So I think we're looking to democratic services in the planning department. I think we've got to watch when we start the meetings, and we've got to watch the sort of updates and when we get the papers, because the later these amendments come through, the more time it takes. And it is, I think, and I think maybe it was Robin was saying that these meetings will take longer over Zoom, right? They won't be quicker. So we must look at how we run those committees. On the dates, I mentioned January, but I think September, October, yeah, we should start about October and go through to December. I personally would welcome that sort of time scale, so that you've got a proposal coming in September, you've got the things going through in October, and you go forward to a council meeting in December, and that would suit me very much. I do like something that's been put into this, just compliment people, and it's on page 4316, and it says members may produce photographs and diagrams, and it's something we've been really trying to do for a long time. So compliments for bringing that in. And if I could make a request to Robin to consider on point 19 on 44, I think we're fairly unique. Dunsfold and Chiddingfold actually straddles 2 areas, and it's quite a problem. They also have issues that involve 2 parishes. Very few other areas have that, and we only get 1 speaking slot, and I would like us to try and address that, not necessarily here, but if I could put it down for Councillor Follows and others to look at it, where an application does go over 2 parishes, I think it's right that each parish gets a chance to speak. That's
Thank you, John. Noted.
Thank you. Councillor Goodridge.
Thank you, Chairman. One matter I didn't address is the timing and reviewing. I think there are 2 issues here. There's the issue of when these regulations cease, and there's a second issue as to whether the regulations that we are putting forward to the council now are fully working, and are there things that should be improved in them. I would have thought that so far as when these regulations cease, as much as I want to see them cease at the earliest opportunity, it's impossible for us here today to work out when it is likely that the government will allow us, firstly, well, 2 things have got to happen. Firstly, the government to allow us to meet as a group. And secondly, when the officers and chief executive of this council are satisfied that the council chamber is safe. Now, that is something outside our control. And therefore, I am happy for when, so far as the regulations coming to an end is concerned, that the wording in recommendation 3 should stand, which is they shall continue in such time as the council agrees they cease, or the 7th of May 2021, which is the long stop. Because as soon as the government say, okay, councils, you can all jump into a committee meeting together and sort out things as the past, and if the chief executive is happy that we will be safe, then I would expect the executive to put forward a resolution sooner rather than later to put that into effect and to bring these to an end. And it's impossible to say whether it would be October, November, December, January, February, or whenever. But what I would suggest is that we set a date when this committee looks at these regulations again, these temporary procedures again, to see if there are any lessons to learn and make, if necessary, tweak them to make it more workable. And that perhaps could be in a shorter time frame than January, and could be, say, September. We come back at a meeting in September to review these temporary arrangements to see if there's any way we can improve them and go from there. So I would like to add, well, not to amend recommendation 3, but to add another recommendation, if you like, that this matter, these regulations come before the Standards Committee during the month of September to review whether there are any lessons to learn and how these regulations could, if necessary, be improved, if any.
Thank you, Councillor Goodrich. I've run out of speakers. Have we got any more speakers?
No. Yes, John, sorry.
And who would that be?
Sorry, Councillor Follows.
Councillor Follows, go on.
I think you've also got Councillor Hyman as well.
Councillor Hyman has had his hand up since the last time we spoke, so I'm assuming he wants to come back. Councillor Follows was next in the queue.
Okay, Councillor Follows.
Just to quickly say, I think actually Councillor Goodrich's perspective there is one I very much support. When the regulations actually end and when we think it's safe are actually two not just unknown but fairly arbitrary distinctions. Actually, the thing that matters you're doing, whether it works, whether it makes sense. Obviously, the fact is we're putting these in. We don't know how it's going to actually pan out. They might not work as intended, and we need to have a period where we can reflect upon that. Things that other members have mentioned too might also happen. It could be exceptionally weighted towards one of the committees, whilst the other one has no work, and that might be something we wish to rectify. So if there is a motion to add an amendment to add an additional recommendation to formally review how this is going in say September, I'd be very much in support of that, because it is about reviewing how these are working as opposed to when the regulations cease.
Yes, thank you for that. Councillor Hyman.
Thanks very much for letting me come back. I'd appreciate it. But just the issue that I think Councillor Follows sort of misunderstood what I was getting at in terms of reaching common ground. It is a far better system which is used, as Councillor Goodrich knows, and anybody else who's fairly au fait with the way that the law works in the country, that you've got different sides agree a statement of common ground so that those things are beyond debate. And in advance of the meeting, people are able to contest the common ground that's reached in order to make sure that things which are fairly straightforward, where the facts are straightforward, rather than subjective issues, which obviously are entirely for the members of the committee to determine, where we've got matters of fact, we don't want them turning up in massive documents with, a week before a planning meeting that may have a number of large applications on it. We don't want our councillors who are making those decisions to have to try and chase everything down in the meeting. There's perhaps we can go back to the first question that I asked, which I haven't really had I don't think I heard. My apologies if it was answered fully, but I'd like to know, how much are we expecting over the coming weeks and 2 or 3 months? How many meetings are we expecting? How many applications, and which ones are they? Give us some idea of what we're actually agreeing to, rather than a bundle of words here. It's the same as I would agree absolutely that we should be looking at this in September or whatever. Councillor Follows originally said July council meeting, which may not even be held for all I know.
Okay, we seem to be repeating, Councillor Hyman.
Can we put
Can we move on?
We want to know how it's going to be done. You know, how is this going to work? If we're going to be discussing this, it says reviewed by the planning committee chairman, so each of them are reviewing it themselves. And I don't really know that there's a system in place there which would satisfy residents' concerns. If you just look at the recommendations, I mean, this is genuine, and I really think we should be able to debate it properly. And we should have been able to do this in advance, but, you know, and it could have been in front of us a month ago when people were thinking about it. But this is absolutely, you know, is there a need for it? No, strictly speaking, not. Do we want to be able to do it? Yes, because it could save us some problems in future for us to make the decision. So yes, we support this, but we've got to be doing it right, rather than, hey, let's just lob it in front of them and hope and think about it later. So you know, I am concerned we need to make sure that there are controls for the residents, and that's why I'd like a system of reach common ground, which will then be put into the committee papers, which will be out, let's say, a minimum of 10 days in advance of the meeting, and then there's an opportunity to contest those, you know, the common ground before we go into the meeting. So that's what we're looking for, something to improve the decision making, because it's going to be very difficult for people otherwise, Chair. Thank you.
Thank you, Councillor Hyman. Daniel, did you want to come in there?
Yes, and I think Fiona would like to speak as well. But can I just address this question of statements of common ground? These are not planning inquiries. Yes, lots of those kind of methods being used in legal disputes and in inquiries, but that wouldn't be appropriate in a planning committee. It's not that sort of arena. But in terms of the controls, I think that Councillor Hyman is thinking of, just to reiterate for members and reassure them that the same level of information, the same level of support and background support before the committee will be available to all members from Zach Elwood's planning service as in the normal course of events, you know, in terms of physical meetings. So, you know, the clarity that needs to be brought to documents will be there as they're prepared, but also if members in the lead up to a meeting have any queries and need to clarify anything, then that same level of support that they already get from the case officer and so on will be there for members. So that level of control. I don't know whether Fiona wishes to speak in terms of we've had a problem with Committee Room 1, Chairman, in terms of it's forced to mute, which I think everyone's been waiting to do to me for years. But I think Fiona may wish to speak on the question of frequency of the meetings.
Yes, thank you, Chairman. And I'm afraid you've the battery on my laptop has run out completely, so it's just died on me. So I've just nipped next door to share Dan's. I wanted to pick up on a couple of points that Councillor Gray made before I forget them. In terms of starting times for meetings, we have been thinking in terms of a 6 p.m. start. A few members have said that daytime meetings, as much as it might suit some members, there are some members such as Councillor Follows who are still working, albeit from home, and have commitments to their employers. So 6 p.m. sort of takes out the need for him to actually travel to the meeting, and there are 1 or 2 other councillors as well who have similar issues where they're still working. So we are thinking in terms of a 6 p.m. start, and as I said, we would hope to manage the agendas so that we're not looking at an indefinite meeting. I think an hour and a half to 2 hours is ample for a Zoom meeting. They are quite wearing, but you know, ultimately that is up to members to sort of do efficient decision making. In terms of the updates coming out late and sort of providing information late, A legal requirement that the planning committee members are provided with all information that they need to make a decision. And given that we have to produce the agenda a minimum of 5 clear working days before the meeting, there's obviously a time lag between the point at which the planning officers finalise their report and we manage to get that into an agenda and issued to you, and the time of the meeting. And during that time, members of the public, residents, are able to continue submitting objections or letters in support. Sometimes we're still waiting for, or we still get consultee reports. The planning officers try very hard not to have statutory consultee responses still outstanding at the point that we issue the agenda, but there are other consultees and their responses are still coming in that interim period. And there is a legal obligation to provide you with that information so that you have it before you make your decision. So inevitably, there will always be some updates that we have to provide. We do try and chase our planning colleagues to get those out to you in as timely a manner as possible. But sometimes it is quite difficult, but we can't get away from having some updates if the more information has been submitted in the interim period. And the longer or the further in advance of the meeting we issue the agenda, the more substantial the updates are likely to be, because there's just more time for more information to come in. So it's a little bit sort of chicken and egg as to how that works. I think those were the only 2 points that I wanted to pick up from Councillor Gray's comments, but yes, we have thought about them.
Thank you, Fiona. Unless there are any other burning issues, I think we need to start looking at the recommendation.
John,
Daniel,
I wanted to
somebody else.
So John, I want to propose an actual amendment to the recommendations based on what we've been discussing.
Yeah, I think what we'll do, we can go through them individually 1 to 4, then we can put the emendations as we go through. Daniel, is there any other councillor that is burning?
Nobody
I can't
else.
see any hands.
No, Councillor Follows has his hand up in respect to that amendment, but otherwise no.
Okay, then let's. It's 2.5 hours nearly, so let's see if we can get the end. So the recommendation then, please. I will take them one at a time. It is recommended that Standards Committee recommends to full council 1 that the arrangements set out in section 4 are adopted as a temporary measure to facilitate decision making by planning committees, whilst the work of the council is impacted by the effects of the coronavirus pandemic. Now, do we want an emendation to that, or are you happy with it?
Can I just ask advice on where the amendment I would like to propose is that a separate session of the Standards Committee be set aside to review and evaluate these changes at, say, the most appropriate week in September. I don't know which is the appropriate place to put such a suggestion.
I think
Robin said 3, but Robin, I'll take advice on that, or Daniel.
My suggestion, Chair, is that it's not an amendment, it's an additional recommendation.
Right.
As I read it, 3 still stands as it is, but there's an additional recommendation saying that this will come back to the Standards Committee for review in September.
Yeah, then fine.
And Chairman, Fiona and I agree that here, and we've also said that it doesn't need to be a recommendation to council. That's just something you agree as a Standards Committee.
Oh yes, of course, certainly, yeah.
Okay, so there'll be a recommendation 5. Okay, so recommendation 1 now. Unless there's anything else, do we agree that? Any abstention?
Yeah, I'm abstaining. I mean, anybody who turns around, and the reason for it is that anybody who turns around and says to me that reaching agreement on the facts in advance is inappropriate for planning committees, I'm not voting for that.
Okay, is anybody against the motion? Then in that case, that is passed. Motion 2, the terms of reference of the new temporary Western and Eastern planning committees, as set out in Annex 1, are incorporated into the Constitution and clearly identified as being temporary measures for a period to be agreed by full council. Is there any emendation wanted on that one? No, fine. Can we agree it? Anybody wish to abstain? Can you shout out if you wish to abstain? Not hearing anything. Anybody disagree? Then that is passed. Number 3, that the need for the new temporary Western and Eastern planning committees are kept under review by the planning committee chairman in consultation with the head of planning and economic development, and should continue such time as council agrees that they cease, or until 7th of May 2021, whichever is sooner. As we've got number 5 coming up, I think we can still pass that one. All those that agree with it? Any abstention?
Chairman, can you just confirm what the what number 5 reads, because we're sort of agreeing this blind otherwise.
Councillor Follows, did you want to put forward that emendation for 5?
I would propose that the recommendations as agreed by full council come back to Standards Committee for formal review and evaluation in September.
Does that satisfy you? In that case, all those that agree.
So is that June or July full council are we talking about? I'm just looking.
Well, so if I may, these recommendations will go to full council. So my suggestion is that the recommendations on planning that are passed by that full council, which I assume is June or July or whenever it ends up being, those recommendations that we actually adopt are reviewed by standards in September to see whether they're working or can be improved.
Okay, happy, thank you.
Okay, so those that agree now with 3, are you in agreement?
Oh.
Anybody abstain? Anybody against? Then in that case, number 4, that where an application could be decided under delegated authority, were it not for there being a connection with a member or officer, then these applications may be delegated to the head of planning and economic development in consultation with the relevant planning committee chairman and vice chairman, such special delegation expiring with the temporary planning committee arrangements. Do we agree with that? Anybody abstain? Anybody disagree? In that case, that too is passed. Sorry, I hear something. Did somebody want to interrupt? No, sorry. In that case, number 5 is a new one.
Chairman, I think Councillor Hyman is speaking, but he's on mute.
I think there's some difficulty here. Am I heard?
You weren't, but you are now.
Thank you. I do apologise. This says in connection with a member of office, and we'd correct that. We've had no opportunity to debate this one here, and we haven't got round to it. And I don't want to take all evening on it, but I would want to debate that because there are some things I don't understand in it. It's something the public would be quite interested in, removing the requirement that these things go in front of the committee. I know there are some outstanding. I wouldn't want to, I'm not on the planning committee, but I just don't, I won't, there are certain questions that need to be asked about this and we haven't got time to go into them tonight. So I'm going to abstain because everybody else is just going to go with it. So my abstention on the basis it hasn't been debated. Thanks.
Thank you. So in fact, then we'll do that vote again as it's slightly changed. So those in favour? Abstaining?
Yes.
And those against? Then in their case, that's passed. Thank you. Now we have the number 5. This is the review. Councillor Follows.
Can I just check on the previous vote? Did Councillor Peter Marriott agree or abstain? I wasn't clear from his indication.
Sorry. Councillor Marriott?
You're on mute, Councillor Marriott.
Councillor Marriott, Peter, we can't hear you. You're on mute.
Abstained.
It was an abstention.
That's correct.
Did you get that, Daniel?
Yes, Chairman, we did.
Right, moving on then. The new number 5. Robin, did you want to read it out, or Councillor Follows, did you want to put it?
Happy to defer to Robin if you've got text already, but I'm happy to repeat otherwise.
Apologies, I haven't got the text, Councillor.
Okay, I'm proposing that the recommendations as agreed by full council, as adopted at full council when they go there, are brought back to review by the Standards Committee in September.
That seems very forthright. So please, can we have an agreement with that? All those agree? Any abstentions? Those against? Would you agree with that, Daniel? That seems as though that's straight through.
Yeah,
Chairman, you haven't indicated how you're voting on these issues because you're sort of sat there without putting your thumb up or whatever. But should we assume you're in favour of everything the officers say? I
have been in favour of them all, yes. You are right. I was concentrating on other people rather than myself. Sorry about that. That seems to be the end of it. So unless, well, we haven't got any other business anyway. So I'd like to thank you all for coming. It was a good debate and I'm glad we got there in the end. And as I said in my little speech, the idea is to try and get this council moving. So we needed to get this through back to the executive. But of course, we had to do it properly. So I'm pleased with the debate. Thank you very much, all of you, for coming. And I look forward to seeing you again. Thank you.
Thank you, Chairman.
Thank you.
Thank you, Chairman.
Thank you, Chairman.
Thanks, Chairman.